Xin chào tất cả các bạn. Đây lại là một video mới mà bác Roby sẽ giới thiệu đến các bạn về quyển sách mới của bác, đặc biệt viết về tiếng Việt. Sẽ có rất nhiều điều thú vị ngạc nhiên,
ainsi que sa mère grand en était folle. D'ailleurs, sa mère grand, cette vieille dame, lui fit faire un petit chaperon rouge. Autour.
Bây giờ thì chúng ta có thể bắt đầu lắng nghe với những gì mà bác chia sẻ trong video này nhé.
Hi, I'm Robbie, and this is already my third book about Vietnam. I wrote about the time I was director in the Terracotta Park Museum, and then I wrote the Vietlish Dictionary about the combination of English and Vietnamese. It's a kind of language I often use when I don't know the Vietnamese things, then I just mix it with English and then it becomes Vietlish. And this book is about the writing systems that has an immense impact on the Vietnamese language. So how did I came on this topic? Well, it's very easy. I wanted to learn Vietnamese, as many foreigners want to do that, and then we start to study, and then after a short time we agree with everybody, yeah, it's very difficult, so it's so difficult. But then I saw all those young Vietnamese children, and they are having so much fun, and they're speaking fluently. And then I saw some of my friends, they even have university degrees, and they have so much problems with it. And then I thought, yeah, there's something wrong. And the teachers I know, they are very good very often. So when the teacher is good, the students are smart, and language can be that difficult, then there must be something else wrong. So about 50 years ago I was studying education theory and how to develop education material, and in that time I had to do a research on chess books for beginners. So I know how to do a research on books to see how educational they are. I bought almost all Vietnamese course I could find, and it didn't take very long before I discovered what was wrong with it. There are several basic wrong things in the teaching of Vietnamese, and maybe the most important wrong start is to start with the pronunciation. And that's something, when I tell that, well, some people even got angry on it, and pronunciation is so important for the language. And then I say, yes, it's like the roof of a house. The roof of a house is also incredibly important. Without a roof there is no house. But who starts with building the roof? I don't think any. They all start with the fundament and then the walls. Of course we have some idea about the roof. Of course we have that. It's the same that when you start to learn Vietnamese, it's good to have some ideas about the pronunciation, how it sounds, but that doesn't mean that you have to start with all those exercises. And there is a very simple technical reason for. We learn to pronounce the necessary sound for our mother tongue the first 3 years of our life. And during that time we also hear some other sounds. When you live in Vietnam in the past, it would be French and Chinese. Now there's Chinese, Korean, English, a lot of English. So those sounds you also you also are used to them, and you also are able to distinguish. But how many foreigners did hear Vietnamese the first 3 years of their life? Yes, when you live in Vietnam, but in how many other countries Vietnamese is the second language? I don't think even in Laos or Cambodia they have English as second language, or Chinese, not Vietnamese. So that is the reason why adults who starts to study Vietnamese, they are not able to distinguish the needed sounds for the Vietnamese. And that is a big problem. We just don't hear the difference. So we can try to pronounce them, but it just doesn't work because, well, in my book I explain very much how, what, and all those other things. So this is just a short introduction. And then, when I was looking at the course book, I also saw something other. And then I discovered what was wrong with the courses Vietnamese. Or I should say, what is the reason why Vietnamese is that difficult, besides the pronunciation, which they should not start with it. And the reason is the Vietnamese writing. So I have to take a few things. I take also a little bit water, and then we go on with the next part of this. Well, the main problem with Vietnamese language is the writing, and almost all people have seen Vietnamese written, and it looks like alphabetic writing because they're using Latin letters, and that is what has caused the problems. So we have to go back 2000 years ago when the Han Chinese, they invaded the north of Vietnam, and then they said from now on every official document should be written in Chinese calligraphy, the logographic writing. Logographic writing means that you have a logo, and a logo that gives you an impression of an idea. For example, I have here two very famous logos to get out, and here we got the logo of going to toilet. They have to be in a hurry. And the Chinese writing those logos, the calligraphy, they have a concept. So they make a character, and the character has a concept. And one of the concepts I will talk about now is the concept for nha. And nha means house in Vietnamese. This could be nha, a house. And it's written like this, nha. And why did I think or thought this was important? Because when we say house in English, and then we say we have two houses, we just add an S on it. But you cannot add an S on nha, because you cannot add an S on a drawing. And that's the whole thing of the Vietnamese writing. They didn't develop an alphabetic writing, no. They asked the Vietnamese, when they see this, how do you pronounce it? And then they say nha, and then they're nha. So the Vietnamese writing is only how you pronounce all the Chinese calligraphies and all those words. And that is what some priests did 400 years ago. And the reason why they did was they came to Vietnam, because Vietnamese, they were not Christian, they had to become a Christian, and for that reason they should be able to read the Bible, and there was no Bible in Vietnamese. So it was Sir Rhodes. There were a few other priests who were working on that, but he made the contemporary alphabet, and that writing is only to make the Vietnamese to read the Bible. So he wasn't interested in the Vietnamese culture. Of course he was a little bit interested, but he was a Jesuit, and Jesuit was an organization especially founded to convert people to become Christian. And we're talking about a few hundred years ago, in the time of the Inquisition and all that kind of things. So it was very important that people became Christian. And the writing he developed it's very based on the Bible. That I also describe all those things in my book, how it works like that. But the whole idea was that they have something, a character, and then they say you pronounce it like this, and so on. And that was in the time there were no video recorders like this, so he must just hear it, and then he heard something in Da Nang where he was sometimes, and then in Ha Noi, so he must make a lot of different sounds. But what makes it so important? First already, what I said, when you have a character of a house, you cannot put an S on it. That means that they had to find other solutions. But like why Nya is house, but they can also say Nyatoi, and then they means it's my wife or my husband. So how is it possible that Nya can mean a brick house but also a beautiful Vietnamese wife or a nice man? The reason we cannot go back on Nya because it has no history. The contemporary Vietnamese writing has no history. To understand the meaning of the words, the etymology, you have to look at the Chu Nong. That's the original Vietnamese writing. Because when the Chinese introduced their Chinese writing, there were a lot of words, Vietnamese words, and there were no Chinese characters. And about 1,000 years ago, the Vietnamese developed their own logographic writing called the Chu Nong. And in the Chu Nong, we can see how words historically have developed. For Nya, we can see, for example, that it started with, well, it should be a pig under a roof, and then they make it more abstract and more abstract till it got the contemporary character. And this is the development. When you want to understand what Nya means, then you realize that this was something very important, safely under a character. So in that time there were not real brick houses. Most of them, they were just wood and things like that. But it was the place where something very important is. And what is very important, that's your family, that's your wife, that's your husband. So somewhere in the development, the character get the meaning for as well the wife and the husband as for the brick house and even other Nyas. So that is a very important development, but those developments you only can understand and you can see because when you know that the original Vietnamese writing was with logographs, and the whole grammar of the Vietnamese language is based on logographs and not on the Latin writing. And there's a very big, very important difference. A logographic writing is visible picture. That's a concept. And it's visible, you do not hear that. While logo of auditory writing, the alphabet, you start with B, Na, House. You write letter by letter, sound by sound. So the alphabetic writing is based on sound. The logographic writing is based on visual, on concepts. And that is, for example, the reason why Vietnamese do not use emotions. Because they don't use that. We use emotions. We say, oh, I'm very hungry. In Vietnamese, you just have a concept and they make words by words by words by words. And that's also how they speak English. Words by words by words by words. In English, we can merge things. We can use sound for our emotions. The Vietnamese, they use completely other things to do that. I also write about that in my book, of course. As I said, about 300-400 years ago, something like that, Alexander the Rhodes, he started to develop the Latin writing so he could use that script to introduce the Bible to the Vietnamese. It was not to say, oh, now we can learn a lot about the Vietnamese culture. So that was not the meaning of the writing. But there was also another big problem, that was that the Vietnamese has many more sounds than there are Latin letters available, especially for the vowels. So he solved that problem by using a lot of diacritic signs. So small things up and down, and so that makes the reading of the Vietnamese also very complex, because it has for Vietnamese it's not a big problem, because they learn and to pronounce their language before they can read. But foreigners, they are using books to learn to pronounce, and for us it's often very difficult to read, especially because the printing and the use of the letter fonts is very bad, very poor, let me say it like that. I also give several examples in my book about that. But now, because they're using so many letters and vowels, and there are many more sounds, so for a lot of sounds they didn't just, they couldn't mark them. And there is one very specific thing in the Vietnamese language which is quite original, because we do have it in other languages, but just very it's rare. We do not use it very often. But in the Vietnamese language they use it constantly, and that is what is called the glide. And the glide, it's a semi-vowel, and you can ask all your Vietnamese friends, your Vietnamese teachers, can you tell me about the glide? And they will look at you and they will think, what is he talking about? They have no idea where you're talking about, because they don't know the glides. They use them the whole day, but they don't know it. Because when they were 3 years old and they start to pronounce, their mother and their father, they never said, oh yeah, that's a glide. No, they just started. And that's a big problem for foreigners. And I discovered it in a very simple way. I was living in Ha Noi at that time, and I wanted to go to the One Kim Lake, and I took my bike, and then I asked somebody, say, Lloyd, One Kim Adao. And they look at me, and then they say, huh? They had no idea where I was talking about. Because in all the books it is written Hoan Kim. Hoan Kim. That's in all the books, and foreigners we see the O and we see the A, O and A, and then we say Hoan Kim. But the whole thing is, the first O is not a vowel, it's a glide. And the only function of this O is to glide from the Ha to the A. And you pronounce it a little bit like a word, something. You just must make a short word, and you just do something and they will understand. You just say One Kim Lake and then they will understand. When you say Hoan, it's also 2 syllables, and Vietnamese words have only 1 syllable, so they will not understand where you're talking about. And those glides, there are more than 20 of those glides, and they can come before the diphthong, before a single vowel, before the... And the problem is with Vietnamese, you see it often on YouTube, when they see, and then they say, yeah, it's a diphthong. But it's not a diphthong, because a diphthong is when you have 2 vowels and they make together another vowel. But in this case, the first vowel disappears and the A stays. And something very funny about it is, I'm working together with a Vietnamese girl, and her name is Hoan. And you can see already it's written O-An with a very big O. So all the foreigners, they always read O-An. I also did in the beginning. Before I didn't know the guide, I also say O-An, and then I said, no, which one? And I did not understand till I knew, oh, it's a glide. So even when it's big and it's the first vowel, first letter in a word, it's still a glide, and it's just one. I get to know about the glide when I bought a book about the grammar from the Ha Noi University, and in that book they said you should not talk about glides the first years. and then I thought, well, those people, they know a lot about Vietnamese language, but they have no idea about teaching, especially not teaching their language to foreigners, because the most important is that you have to know what you do. And what I see also on videos on YouTube is that they say we are practicing the tones, because it is said that the tones are very difficult. It's nonsense, of course, because there are only 5 or 6 tones. And we use the same tones when I can say, yeah, yes, oh, yeah, yes. Well, we have the same tones and many more. They even cannot use the tones for sentence, only for single words. That's another story also in my book. But when they're practicing the tones, they say, oh, you pronounce wrongly. But the reason is that you pronounce the glide wrongly, but they are so focused on the tones and you too that you think that you do not pronounce your tone very good. Well, it's another thing, and that's a very big important thing. The glide is something that should be mentioned in the first lesson of the course Vietnamese. Listen, this is a very typical thing. When they created the written language, they didn't have enough vowels, so they just used some vowels again. And for the Vietnamese, it's no problem, because they learn their language the first 3 years of their life, and they have no problems with the pronunciation. But foreigners we have, and there are too many beautiful sounds in the Vietnamese. And also Vietnamese is a little bit monotone language, because the tones, they go up and down, and but they are always related to one tone. So they always have to be so that's how it sounds to me. Only when they sing, especially when they sing Cải Lương. Cải Lương is a combination between opera, which I love very much, I grew up with it, and Jimi Hendrix, I also grew up with him, he's also incredibly good. And you mix them together, opera and the guitar of Jimi Hendrix, and then you get Cải Lương. And Cải Lương, it comes from the south, and it's incredibly lovely music. When they sing that, it's very nice. And then the Vietnamese is beautiful to hear. Also when they sing songs from Trinh Con Song and others. So that's it. I like to tell something funny I discovered, because there is a general idea that Asian people, they do not show so much emotions, and then people think they have a less emotional, they are less emotional than we are. And that's a misunderstanding, and just that it has everything to do with the writing, because in alphabetic writing you normally use the sound. It's a sound-based writing, so you use when an Italian asks for coffee, like yeah, and you can hear when German they have a lot of ach man, so dat spreekt toch niet zo schön, dat gibt toch niet zo. And the French, they have the air, and the Arab people, they I don't know all those things, but in each case, or the Swiss, the Vietnamese, they do not have that typical sound, because it isn't a sound-based language. It's a video, logographic-based pictures. That's so important for them. And because it's not that sound-based, and they do not use their face to have big expressions, that means that the face also have less expression lines. And that makes, for example, for recognizing people, there are computer programs to recognize faces, and they have more problems with Vietnamese or with Asian people, especially with Chinese people. They did a lot of research, and that's because they are not using their face so much for expression. They do, but very, very little. I think most of them, they do it with their nose, because it appears that Chinese recognize each other by their nose, and that's kind of funny. But after 3 years, when you are born, the first 3 years you learn to distinguish the sound. The next 3 years you learn to see the relation between the sound and the pronunciation and the facial expression and what is the factual meaning of something. And that is, so it takes all 6 years together to get to understand how the language is, and to understand when they say something, to see whether they are making a joke or not, because they also very funny things. But they have very small particles or simple words, like when you want to be polite, you say just sin. Sin is always good. When you start something with sin loy, sin moy, sin hello, it doesn't matter. It's always something nice. So they have many of those lovely small particles. And the funny thing is that we don't hear them, because they are telling, but they hear very good a small particle somewhere. The most, the one I know in each case, you have do, and that means something is good, but B is a very short B. And when they say, for example, oh, I went to the theater yesterday evening, and then when it was not good, they will say, I went to the theater, I went to B, theater. So they just add B into the line, and then the other know, oh, it was not good. But when they talk to you, they will still, also with others, they will still keep on smiling, because they don't know whether the other will like the fact that you do not like that, and things like that. It's a very complex, and Asian people, especially Vietnamese, they always smile. They smile when they're happy, they smile when they're not happy, they smile when they're scared, they smile when they see the food, and then everybody smiles when they eat the food. So it's a nice thing, my book, I hope so. The end of my book, I put a picture of the Da Nang beach, because I was working the whole day, and then around 4 or 5 o'clock I went to the beach to just get my brains a little bit cooled down. And then I had a phone with me, somebody lent me the phone, and then I took with the phone pictures of the beach, always the same place, same time, but nevertheless so many different pictures. So I'm also going to make a compilation of the pictures, and I will publish in a book which I will have for free. People can just order it for free. I will put it on Amazon, and everybody can get it for free. I would say have a nice day, and I hope you enjoyed. And it was very interesting to look into the origin of the Vietnamese language. I did like to write about the developing the last 2000 years. It was for me more difficult. I also wrote a part about the difference between logographic writing and auditory writing, because that's we use different parts of our brains for the two, and that's interesting. And for the ones who think no, every language is saying, well, no. Logographic writing is more like mathematic formulas. They do not use sound, they just have juk, 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 and then people understand that. And that's the same with logographic, it's a visual thing. That's also the reason why reading logographic writing goes much faster than reading alphabetic. There is also the prejudice that logographic characters, that they are more difficult, and no, that's not true. They're just different. And the way we build up words with letters, they use strokes, several strokes, and they always have the same order and the same kind of strokes, exactly the same as we will use letters, but the strokes do not have sound. And the logographic writing is also much more efficient than the alphabetic writing, and that is very interesting. So, for example, for very basic English, you need to know about 5,000 words, but with 2,000-3,000 characters, you can do already a high exam in Chinese writing, because you only need a few thousand of them. Because words, they are more limited and more based on the sound, and when you write it, you're missing the sound. While the logographic, they are very complex, they are very easy to contain a lot of information in the writing, and that's much more interesting. So, meanwhile, my neighborhood, they started to work, to build again, so we have a little bit background noise. But look, it's the end of the video. I want to thank you for watching it, and I hope I was able to make you also interested in the Vietnamese culture and history, because it's so interesting, and it also teaches you about contemporary Vietnam. Why is it going so well with Vietnam? It's something very, very strange. When you want to know more about my exhibitions and educational projects, and when you want to share my experience, you can go to my Patreon site. It's just Patreon Roby Bellemans. And if you want to know more about what the Cultural Vietnam Exchange Company does, please subscribe into our videos. You will find several interesting videos about old bronze casting, but also about artists who came to Vietnam to work with children, because that's the future. And the new noise you now hear, it is one of the cats, because the children gallery, it's called the Bong and Pancake gallery, and they are named after the cats. The cats are very lovely, they are cats, I love cats. So one of the reasons I love them is because they do not listen. So when I say stop it, then well, he's stopping a little bit. So I wish you a very nice day, and thank you very much, and maybe see you in the next video. Ciao. Tạm biệt.